Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be, and welcome to a post about literature about Charles Dickens. It's called Mrs. Jellyby and Mr. Skimpole. It's also about artificially constructed historical works. First editions of Dickens's work interest me because the prices vary so dramatically. Whereas A Christmas Carol costs $40,000 and Hard Times costs $3,000, a first edition of Bleak House, a much longer and mature work by what I've read from scholarly reports, it only costs $100 to $200. And I wonder, why might that be the case? Do old book connoisseurs know something about the origins of the text that the rest of us don't? After finding evidence of synthetic historical works used to lend the air of authority to various morality tales, I wondered if this might be yet another such example. In Charles Dickens' last novel, Bleak House, the one I'm suspicious about, it was a lengthy work published around the same time as A Tale of Two Cities, where three children are shown examples of adults who neglect their children while they pursue selfish, artistic, or political projects. In many ways, its naked morality tale is far more suited to our modern age than it was to the Victorian age. Mrs. Jellyby has a filthy house full of neglected children, yet she spends all of her time writing letters to increase the colonization and coffee production in Africa. She likes to drink a lot of coffee. And Mr. Skimpole is an artist who lives his life like an irresponsible child, expecting others to pay his debts for him, and producing children that he does nothing to care for. What a nice lesson for people like me. What a nice lesson for modern, career-driven, internet-addicted parents. Your selfish curiosity and ambition is not worth neglecting your children. You can hand this book to an overzealous academic and help them put their life back in perspective. Just reading it made me feel guilty. I don't think I'm neglecting my children, but in Germany the standards of parenting are rather foreign. I feel like I'm always being judged for not knowing the right things to do. For example, my kids don't like the bread boxes that I make. The other kids have different stuff in their boxes. And so I've ended up experimenting with so many different things like crackers, carrot sticks, and it invariably fails. So they've just gotten used to not liking it. And I think that I'm probably judged for that because bread boxes are very important in Germany. And of course, like all parents, I struggle with the electronic toys that the kids use. And so we all have that to deal with, but I'm quite sure I'm not as bad as Mrs. Jellyby or Mr. Skimpole. Okay, I'm getting off track here. So this is about synthetic historical works, and I'm suspecting that Bleak House might be somewhat synthetic. And how might one go about identifying that? One has to start on a sort of detective, thinking like a detective. Was it in the 80s or the 90s? On Quora, I found a man from India who wrote that he had read Bleak House in the mid-1990s as part of his study of English, but I couldn't find anybody from the US or Britain who talked about reading it at such an early date. It made me wonder if this work was created to program foreign readers with a specific set of values and with an eye towards discouraging people who would become overly invested in their passions about art and politics. And that's Mr. Skimpole and Mrs. Jellyby. The first thing I look for in my detective search is for works like an old Masterpiece Theatre BBC production I'd like to find one of Bleak House. And since they made these sorts of productions for all of the classics, all of Dickens's stories, all of the Brontes, Jane Austen, why would they leave out Bleak House? So these sorts of things were all filmed in the 1980s. Bleak House has just as much drama and commercial appeal as any of those other stories. But what I found was surprising is that while I could find a BBC production of Hard Times, a similar novel that was done in the 1980s, I could find nothing for Bleak House that predated a rather crappy production from 2005. I mean, I grew up watching Masterpiece Theater, and the one from 2005 just looks like almost like a parody of what I grew up watching. It's all fashion and it's like melodrama. It didn't feel like Dickens at all. Taken all together, this bit of evidence is suspicious but not condemning. After this, I look at the content of the book and I compare it to Dickens's previous works. Whereas all of his other works featured male protagonists and male points of view in men's worlds where women were dutiful supporting characters, Bleak House followed two different points of view. One is an authorial perspective which sort of zooms around in a cinematic fashion that is rather uncharacteristic of Victorian literature, and the other is the point of view of a young woman, Esther, who drives a romantic feminist subplot which has the flavor of a modern woman's novel. So, and Dickens never did this in any of his other works. The style of the writing and the names, it's all Dickens, but the point of view and plot doesn't seem like Dickens at all. So now we have two pieces of evidence that make this work look suspiciously like it might be a synthetic creation, a modern creation. Next up, I can search the academic trail. So people write theses on Dickens' work all the time, ever since the Victorian age, possibly. So where does this academic trail run cold? I found a thesis from the 1980s, and it references a book called The Reader in Dickens' World by Susan R. Horton, that I cannot seem to get from a library where I am. It is a 100-page book that costs over $100. And while I'm not willing to shell out that much to verify the wild speculative trail I'm following, I won't let it stop me either. After peeking inside of Horton's book, I see that the first few pages describe the social impact of Dickens's words, and one gets the impression that one is reading a manual for using literature to manipulate a population. So back to the thesis that was citing this work. It was from the 1980s, and it was supposedly written in Nebraska. And one might wonder how many theses from Nebraska in the 1980s have been uploaded onto the internet. Why is this one preserved and easily Googleable? It doesn't seem terribly special, unless I can walk into a library and find the paper copy of random theses in any university in the US and verify that the number of such Bleak House theses is comparable to the number of theses dedicated to Dickens's other works, say prior, if these theses were all prior to 1980, would be particularly interesting. I'm going to maintain my suspicion that Bleak House is a synthetically constructed modern work, made to look like an older book. Since I am in Germany, I can't go to a library like that, a US library, and if some commenter showed up here on my blog to claim that they checked out what is available in their local library, I'd still be suspicious because I'm the sort of person who likes to verify things in real life. If I were in a university in the US, I'd want to track down all of the references found in this thesis and look at the hard copies. Do they look authentic? Does the material referenced match the claims in the thesis? If I am correct that there are synthetically constructed histories or historical works designed to make it easier to manipulate people's sense of ethics and morality or without the aid of deities, I imagine that whoever is in charge of creating these works wouldn't like their game exposed to the public. However, since I'm a nobody, maybe I can get away with such speculations. In any case, such speculations would make it easier to paint me as a loony should I ever accidentally achieve temporary fame for something that some group doesn't like. It seems that's how the media works today. It's you have to say what they want you to say. There really is no winning a game where the other team is, not openly, it's not obvious. They're hidden. Conspiracies, And I doubt that you would want to win such a game, since depriving people of their illusions would be highly disruptive. It might spur a new sort of religion if you aren't careful. I mean, what's happening with QAnon is a result of people feeling like the story they're getting, it ain't right, and when people sense that, they start to create alternative narratives that can be quite disruptive. So, for example, in a more mundane case, if Charles Dickens is akin to, a god for some secularly oriented literature major, having one of his works outed as a synthetic modern creation would be like pulling the rug out from underneath her feet. She would be completely adrift and easy for a cult to snap up and re-indoctrinate with a fresh pile of garbage. And I wonder if that might be the true purpose of synthetic works, to destabilize certain types of people. They are kind of an attack on a young person's mental immune system that makes it easier for the cult that creates the works to reprogram that young person with their ideology. Now, I'm adding speculations to my speculations, and whenever you get compounded speculations, it is time to stop. Nevertheless, people are gullible, and I think it is worth thinking about the implications. There are some links in there that you should take a look at in the blog post below. Manipulation of historical documents has surely been going on since the beginning of time, but I still think that old garbage is probably better than fresh garbage because it has had more time to get filtered according to what people find useful. What is certain is that the garbage they made last week stinks, and the new garbage painted to look like old garbage stinks even more. It is the same in the pop science or sci-com industry, and there is a lesson from that community about the risk associated with tearing down all of the false gods of academia all at once. I mean, Galileo did this, and it didn't turn out well for him. Am I a natural-born risk-taker with a death wish, driven to become a martyr or a necessary change initiator upon whom a new religion will be founded? My goodness, I hope not. In some way, such risk-takers are the only truly conscious people within a system of agreeable conscious agents, and most of the time they just get dismissed as being harmless kooks or crackpots. But sometimes they get crucified and a new religion is born. I'd like to limit myself to just warning people that secularism is a religion that is just as weird as the older theistic religions, and those who go about constructing secular myths are far more devious. It almost makes me want to stick to reading older texts so that I can avoid the manipulations of more modern people who may be trying to get me to do things that are not in my interest. And I really wish these people hadn't done this, because it causes, it's like having a rug you can just pull out from underneath an entire country. It's a form of subversion. You destabilize people's faith in their historical traditions, and those people suddenly lose faith in their government. And I think that's a bad kill switch to build into your design. Of course, Mrs. Jellyby and Mr. Skimpole seem perfectly harmless. I just prefer more authenticity about the authorship of things I read, and this goes for the modern publishing industry as well. So I think that it's possible to defuse this sort of bomb, this historical subversive bomb, get rid of that kill switch by gradually getting people used to these ideas. And it's going to have to happen because people's attitudes about history are bound to be disrupted as the internet age gets fully underway. I mean, when libraries are all digital and when one can use an AI to transform Harry Potter into something that sounds like something Charles Dickens wrote, constructing fake history becomes far too easy. So, and I think there was some author recently she wrote in 2016, her name started with an H. She wrote a book about how easy it is to get people to construct false memories. That's why we have to write things down and why we need them in paper format. So my conclusion is please support your local library and buy a paper copy of my books, Someday they'll be famous. And I think you would enjoy them. Until next time, thank you for watching.